Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Chairman, thank you for two excellent, incisive speeches that I think have helped give us some good guidance for our work. Governors and distinguished guests, it's a real pleasure to join you for the annual meetings of the IMF and the World Bank Group. I'd like to extend a special thanks to the government and people of Singapore and to you, Mr. Prime Minister, for hosting us and for their hard work in organizing this meeting, and to the Chairman of the Development Committee, Alberto Carrasquilla, for leading our important discussions. I'd also like to take just a moment to recognize Pat Davies, the manager of Bank Fund Conferences Office, who's been working as a vital element of this effort for 16 years. Of course, managing meetings of this scale is inevitably, necessarily a team effort, but Pat has been our team leader, and she's going to be a very tough act to follow. Let's all show our appreciation. It's been my privilege to serve as president for more than a year now. I'm pleased to say that in that time, the bank group lending has set records. IDA provide $9.5 billion in support for the poor, more than ever before, and half of that was dedicated to Africa. IBRD's lending to middle-income countries is at the highest level in 7 years, at $14.2 billion. MIGA issued $1.3 billion in investment guarantees, and our largest increase of all is IFC support to the private sector, with a 25% jump to $6.7 billion. And no discussion of the past year would be complete, of course, without highlighting the important multilateral debt relief initiative. That landmark commitment provides much-needed debt relief for the world's poorest countries, releasing funds to achieve the Millennium Development Goals. We need to continue working, of course, to increase quality as well as quantity, and to harmonize our efforts with our partners. But those numbers tell a very good story, and I'm grateful to everyone who helped achieve them. I'm grateful to you, Rodrigo, a man of integrity and a genuine colleague, for your friendship and for encouraging a close partnership between our two organizations. Thank you, and congratulations on your success this morning. And to my board for their guidance and support, including on some very difficult issues. But most of all, I want to thank my dedicated staff, serving in more than 100 countries around the world and in our headquarters in Washington. Your professionalism and commitment have made this past year a very strong year for the World Bank Group, and for the mission that we serve to bring hope and opportunity to the world's poor. I'd also like to take note that my predecessor, Jim Wolfowitz, is here with us this morning. I want to thank him for his decade of remarkable leadership and service that left me with an organization that was at the top of its form. Thank you, Jim. As we gather today in this splendid convention center, let's not lose sight of the reason why we're here. Outside these walls and across the world, there are more than 1 billion people struggling to survive on less than $1 a day. They're not going to go to bed tonight. They will go to bed tonight, hungry and sick, not in 5-star hotels. But the wealth we see around us is an inspiring reminder that there is a road out of grinding poverty to prosperity. Just 41 years ago, an independent Singapore embarked on an uncertain journey. Unemployment was high, industry non-existent, and the future looked bleak. Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew wrote of that day, "I started out with great trepidation on a journey along an unmarked road to an unknown destination." Around us now, we see that destination. Singapore's remarkable progress along the road from poverty to prosperity has also been discovered by many other countries in East Asia and around the world. In the past 25 years, 400 million people worldwide have escaped extreme poverty, making this the most successful quarter century in the history of the fight against poverty. Each country must find its own path, but across cultures and faiths, communities and nations, People pursue the same dreams, the chance to go to school, the security of a good job, the ability to provide a better future for their children. Last year, I told you our first priority had to be Africa, the one region that has been conspicuously left behind by that impressive progress. And I remain convinced that Africa has to be our number one priority. But after 1 year and visits to 10 African countries, I would now add that I see not only desperate need, but real opportunity. In 6 years, the number of countries in conflict in that part of the world fell from 13 to 5. Of course, Sudan is a grim exception to that positive trend. Darfur's desperate and poor are at risk of violent extinction. The international community must act, and must act soon and decisively, to end that violence. But when countries do emerge from crisis, as Sierra Leone, Liberia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Central African Republic have done in recent years, they face a new set of obstacles on the road to development. Their leaders need to move swiftly to improve the lives of their citizens and stabilize a fragile peace. And we, the international development community, must move more swiftly to support them. As one of my country directors told me, what these countries don't need is more incomprehensible documents the size of telephone books that arrive 18 months too late. In Liberia, for one example, we're pushing ourselves to do things faster. We've provided $67 million in high-impact grants to rebuild roads, ports, and airports, and to restore electricity and water supplies to the Liberian people. We need to do the same for the people of Lebanon. Some African countries are further along on the path of progress. 17 of them have sustained annual growth rates of 4% or better over the last 10 years, and some as high as 7 or 8%. The challenge for us in the development community in these countries is to accelerate that growth and to help others find and follow their path to prosperity. The Bank Group's response to that challenge has been the Africa Action Plan, and after 1 year, I'm pleased to report progress in increasing our support for private sector development, for closing the infrastructure gap, including regional infrastructure, and for improving health and education. I hope by next year we will be able to report more progress in the key area of agriculture. Across Africa, crumbling infrastructure has held back business expansion and opportunities in international markets. Today, an entrepreneur in Central Africa pays more than 3 times what his Chinese counterpart pays to transport a container the same distance. For that African entrepreneur, the path out of poverty is literally a paved road. We are supporting our African partners also in efforts to expand access to power, water, and transportation for their people. In the last year alone, we've increased our investments in infrastructure by 15%. There's no shortage of innovative plans in Africa for improving infrastructure. There are simply not enough resources. For young African children, the path out of poverty starts in the classroom, but too many of them are still not able to attend even primary school. And for the whole subcontinent, those 2 terrible killers, AIDS and malaria, are major obstacles on the road out of poverty. The Education for All Fast Track initiative has encouraged a growing number of countries, the majority of them in Africa, to develop credible plans for increasing primary school enrollment, especially for girls. That initiative could fulfill the dreams of 70 million children in 60 countries who want to go to school if, but let me underscore that, if donors increase the resources that are needed to match improved performance. We're also part of a global coalition to fight HIV/AIDS, an effort that increased 8-fold the number of people with access to therapy in just 2 years. But we still haven't reached 80% of the people who need treatment, and to do that takes resources. And malaria remains one of Africa's biggest killers. Through our new malaria booster program, we could reach over 125 million people, including 30 million children. In Tanzania, I met a mother of 5 who was buying a bed net for the first time in her life. She told me her 5 children had luckily not fallen victim to that horrible disease, but we can't let luck alone determine the future of Africa's children. With the bank's help, over 10 million mosquito nets and 15 million doses of anti-malarial drugs will be distributed to people like that young mother. At the Dakar conference last week, we heard a strong appeal for donors to fight malaria with greater coordination and greater transparency. We're setting up a system to track the use of bed nets, access to anti-malarial treatment, and indoor spraying. But to identify gaps and take action to fill them, we need to capture the activities of all donors in a common tracking system. We need your help to make that happen. So a lot of hard work lies ahead of us. There's a real opportunity to move faster. But 1 year after the Gleneagles promise, the international community is in danger of falling short on its commitments to increase aid to Africa. African countries can't build on a foundation of hollow promises. If the rich countries abandon their commitments to double aid by 2010, we will fail to serve the best hope for Africa's future, its people. IDA support to the poorest countries is now at a historic high. And last month we transferred nearly $1 billion of World Bank Group income to IDA. That's also a record. But the need for IDA support remains larger still, and we can't fill the gap alone. IDA 15 talks will begin next year. With continent-wide signs of growth and a number of countries poised to take advantage of fresh funds, we must aim high for a replenishment that matches the ambitions and hopes of the African people. Africa is our first priority, but it cannot be our only priority. Today, 2/3 of the world's poor live in middle-income countries in Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. The number of people living in extreme poverty in Brazil, China, and India put together is almost twice the number in sub-Saharan Africa. In China, I visited the western province of Gansu, where some families are still surviving in caves. In Brazil, I walked through the crowded, impoverished favelas of São Paulo, standing in stark contrast to rich neighborhoods just a few blocks away. The poor in those countries do have one potential advantage. They live in countries where the private sector is growing and where governments have resources and access to finance. When their governments borrow from us, what they want is faster, customized service, greater flexibility, lower costs, streamlined procedures, and improved access to our learning and expertise. The Bank Group's new strategy for engagement with our IBRD partners contains a range of proposals designed to help us meet those expectations. It recognizes that to engage effectively in middle-income countries, we need to run hard to keep up because our partners are becoming more sophisticated every year. As more and more people move along that path from poverty to prosperity, the demand for global goods will increase, not decrease. These global problems require global solutions and global resources. The avian flu, the appetite for clean energy, and the devastation of natural disasters know no borders. Today, the World Bank Group is at the forefront of international efforts to raise and administer funds to meet challenges like those that confront rich and poor countries alike. No matter where they are on the path to prosperity, from countries in crisis to countries gaining access to commercial credit, to the most advanced economies in the world needs institutions that can mobilize and manage resources on a global scale. And we at the World Bank Group are very proud of our experience and our ability to meet those needs. Throughout the world, and importantly in the developing world, there is a growing recognition that the path to prosperity must be built on a solid foundation of good governance. Without governance, all other reforms will have limited impact. Those are not my words. That was the conclusion from last year's Commission on Africa. And it is a view I have heard on sidewalks and in taxicabs, in the marbled halls of ministries, and in rundown shacks of shantytowns. For us in the development community, good governance is not an end in itself. It is the foundation of the path out of poverty. It leads to faster and stronger growth. It ensures that every development dollar is used to fight hunger, poverty, and disease. In more and more countries, leaders and citizens alike are demanding transparent and accountable governments that deliver results. As we respond to their calls, we must recognize that governance challenges differ from one country to another, and our support must take that into account. A one-size-fits-all approach will simply not work. And we need to remember that progress in governance is made over time, not overnight. Our strategy commits us to a course of deeper engagement to strengthen governance and fight corruption. Even in the most challenging environments, we need to remain engaged, seek out and support champions of reform in both governments and civil society, including parliaments, the judiciary, and the media, to deliver results for the poor. As a global institution, the World Bank Group can help countries learn from the experience of others. In Chile, India, Mexico, and Korea, for example, transparent e-procurement systems have cut the costs of public procurement and saved literally billions of dollars in government expenditures. For developing countries, those savings mean more resources can be spent on textbooks, medicines, and essential public services. In India and Bangalore, a citizens group is using report cards to rate the quality of public services and hold public officials to account. By putting those ratings on public display, government performance has improved, and customer satisfaction with electricity service and public hospitals has soared. We are also working with the other multilateral and bilateral institutions, and in that spirit this week we concluded a milestone agreement with the other multilateral development banks to share information to combat fraud and corruption. And finally, but by no means least important, let's remember that rich countries have a vital responsibility in the fight against corruption. They need to take action against bribe givers who often come from their countries, and they need to help our developing country partners recover stolen assets. In every poor country, in every city, in every village, there are children who need books to learn, mothers who need access to health care for their babies, and men and women who need jobs for their families. We owe it to our shareholders and to the millions of people living in poverty around the world to make sure that the development dollars entrusted to us are used as our Articles of Agreement require for their intended purpose. East Asia's experience demonstrates that no matter where countries are on the path out of poverty, it is the energy and talent of the private sector that creates jobs and drives progress. Several months ago, I visited an agricultural cooperative financed by the IFC in Chimaltenango in highland Guatemala. I spoke to farmers who just 10 years ago were barely making ends meet as subsistence farmers. Today, they're growing fruit and vegetables for global chains. These small producers, many of them women, now earn up to $800 a month. That's 4 times the monthly wage in Guatemala. This year, the IFC celebrates its 50th anniversary. In a half a century, it has become a global operation that is in the business of creating opportunities for the poor. Each dollar of IFC's investment leverages much larger investments by other businesses for millions of enterprises. In most poor countries, excessive business regulation places a heavy burden on entrepreneurs. The IFC's Doing Business report provides a roadmap for government leaders and policymakers to ensure reforms to eliminate this burden and help create jobs. Last year, I'm happy to say, Africa has emerged as one of the fastest reforming regions in the world, and Tanzania and Ghana are among the top 10 reformers worldwide. Good governance and entrepreneurial energy can help countries advance along the road to development. But if, at the end of that road, there's no place to sell their products, small entrepreneurs and poor farmers will run into a dead end. They need market access and trade to improve their lives and escape poverty. Today, that promise of a better future is in peril. With the Doha round hanging in the balance, we must consider new ideas and accept that every party in this deal needs to compromise. The United States needs to accept further cuts in spending on trade-distorting agricultural subsidies. The European Union needs to reduce barriers to market access. And developing countries like China, India, and Brazil need to cut their tariffs on manufacturers. Developing countries also need to remove trade barriers that make it harder for them to trade with each other. Doha must succeed, and we must make sure that the poorest countries come out winners. Last year's Hong Kong offer of duty-free, quota-free access for the least developed countries needs to be improved with less restrictive tariff lines and less restrictive rules of origin. We must move now before the window of opportunity closes. Governors, ladies and gentlemen, 5 months ago when I visited Guerrero, the poorest state in Mexico, I met children who were the first in their families to have the opportunity to attend school. I still remember the words of one young girl who shared her dream of stepping out of poverty into a brighter future. Reciting a poem in her native Nahuatl, she said, "Noche nikneki nikpatlas, I want to change everything. I want to change everything because I love the tiller of the soil and the sweat of his labor that enriches my homeland and brings forth maize, beans, and potatoes. I want to change everything," she said, "because I love a world that does not yet exist, where those that bake bread can eat it too, where the farmer becomes a gardener of life and not of death." Mr. Chairman, governors, distinguished guests, from Mexico to Mongolia to Malawi, there are millions of poor people who, when given the chance, will work hard to escape poverty. It's not their performance that holds them back, but the conditions around them, from bureaucratic red tape to potholed roads to protected markets. Our mission is to help pave the way so that they can take control of their own destiny. Let's not miss the historic opportunity before us. Thank you.